Good afternoon and welcome to the Public Records Rulemaking Advisory Committee, or RAC. Just for your awareness, to ensure public access to this public meeting, this meeting is live broadcast on our YouTube channel. So if
I'm
you are
on mute, bud.
you
Oh,
are
no, I'm not. Sorry.
That's okay. You are more than welcome to come off or on video, just knowing that this is recorded. And you are able to join in on the chat via the chat function, or you can come off mute and join in the conversation. If you have a lot of background noise, we just ask that you be mindful of the noise around you and mute. We are going to give folks 1 more minute to join in on the call before we get started. All right, folks, it looks like we have the majority of people here in the meeting for the Rulemaking Advisory Committee. We may have 1 or 2 more individuals joining us afterwards, but we will get us started just because we want to respect your time today. So welcome to the Public Records Request Rulemaking Advisory Committee. My name is Chris O'Grady. My pronouns are she, her, and I am the Legal Affairs Manager here at the Oregon Department of Early Learning and Care. We want to welcome and thank you for joining this Rulemaking Advisory Committee. It's really important for us to get your thoughts as members of the early learning system on our rulemaking process and the proposed rules as they move forward within our agency. So the agenda that we have today is we are going to do welcome and attendance. We have a smaller rulemaking advisory committee today, so we want to make sure that everyone has a minute to introduce themselves and what their role in the early learning system is and where you're joining us from. And we will do a review of group norms. Then we'll review the Rulemaking Advisory Committee purpose and scope for this particular set of rules that will be considered. And then we're actually going to review the draft language for the proposed rules. And then we'll do some closing comments and thank you. So to do our introductions, I'm actually going to stop sharing my screen so we can see all of you. And just as a reminder, if you joined us a little bit late, we are live on our YouTube channel to ensure public access. So folks can see your video if you come off video. If you don't want to be on video, that is completely okay. For introductions today, it would be great to have your name, your pronouns, if you'd like to share them, and your role and what organization you might be representing. I'm going to turn it over to some other state staff that I have in the room today, and I'll turn it over to Kate.
Hi folks, Kate Gonzalez, she, her pronouns, Communications Director here at Department of Early Learning and Care, and I'll pass it over to Scott.
Okay, my name is Scott Alto. Pronouns are he, him, his. I am the enforcement officer with the Child Care Licensing Division of DELC, and I consult with public records requests. And I am based in Salem, and I will pass it over to Christina.
Hello all, Christina Cortez-Bannock, Public Information Strategist with the Department of Early Learning Care Communications team, and I am here to just be of support.
Thanks. And that rounds out the staff that are present today to support the Rulemaking Advisory Committee. All of the staff on the call today are staff that actually support the work of public records requests here at the department. And now we'd love for you to introduce yourselves as Rulemaking Advisory Committee participants. Nancy, I'll turn it over to you.
Hi, everyone. I'm Nancy Patton, and I'm the Director of Child Care Partners. We are the Child Care Resource and Referral Program that serves Gillum, Hood River, Sherman, Wasco, and Wheeler counties.
Tanya?
Hi, Tanya Coker, she, her. I work for Willamette Education Service District, so I'm a provider for early intervention, early childhood special education. We also operate Preschool Promise and the infant early childhood mental health consultation. What is it called? RF, what are we called? I don't remember. We doing something with that?
Thanks. Annalise?
Hi, I'm Annalise Shahan. I am the one of two union representatives representing licensed family child care providers here through Oregon Child Care Providers Together Local 132 AFSCME.
Jesse?
Hi, my name's Jessie Burrows. She, her, they, them pronouns, and I am an organizer rep with AFSCME. Council 75 supporting local CCPT 132. And sorry, I've got a kiddo that I've got in the background. That's Jackson. He's giggling in the background doing homework. And I'll pass it over to Nancy.
Well, Nancy already went, but I'll turn it over to Tiffany. Are you able to come off mute?
Yes. Can you hear me okay?
Yep.
Okay. My name's Tiffany Graven, she, her pronouns. I'm in Multnomah County, and I'm actually on the cusp of becoming licensed as a registered family child care provider. I'm also an advocate to help try to remove barriers for myself and for others that are trying to become self-sufficient and economically stable. And so hopefully I can learn a lot from being here today.
Thanks, Tiffany. We're glad to have you. Quentin?
Hi, my name is Quentin Bukowski. I am the father of 3 little children, 2 boys and a girl, who are part of the early learning care system. They go to the OCDC school in Ashland.
Thanks. So glad to have you here today. We are going to jump into a little bit of background and purpose of these rules. So I'm going to share my screen again. So as a state agency, the Oregon Department of Early Learning and Care, almost everything that we do is subject and is a matter of public record with very few exemptions. So because of that, and because of the work that we do as a state, it's really important for us to have a framework and a structure for how we respond when we get requests from the public to public records requests. We also have a legislative requirement for having a public records request process as a state agency. So ORS 1923247 requires each public body to publish our policies and procedures for making public records requests. And although we haven't had official rules for our public records request process before, we have had our processes published on our website. They are also currently published on our website. Previously and currently, because we don't have these rules because they're not adopted yet, they're only proposed, we are complying with the DAS statewide policy, and DAS stands for Department of Administrative Services. And a statewide policy means it applies to all of the state agencies, and it is number 107-001-030. We won't pull up the DAS administrative policies today just because we will be going over what our proposed rules are, and it covers what we need to cover there. And we do follow the Attorney General's model rules for agencies and boards. And you can find that in statute at ORS 183.341. So not only do we as an agency follow this public records request, but also if there's any public records request that comes to the Early Learning Council and the work that the Early Learning Council does as the governing body over the early learning and care system. As staff, we also help fulfill those public records requests. So the reason why we are bringing forward proposed rule changes is that the Department of Early Learning and Care became an agency on July 1st of 2023. And the Attorney General's office recommends that all agencies and boards adopt the model rules for procedures around rulemaking to comply with the Administrative Procedures Act. And that's just a general act for things that we have to comply with when it comes to public records. But our process for meeting the public records requests can differ somewhat. So we wanted to be as transparent as possible in what our public records requests are and put them in rule. So members of the public can see what that process is. So you may have seen other agencies' rules before, and you might say, hey, these rules seem really similar to other agencies' rules. That's because we started from the model rules as a draft and tailored them as we needed to as an agency. One other thing I wanted to note here in just the history and background, this public records request process doesn't apply in all instances when we get requests for information from particular bodies. For instance, we do have a collective bargaining agreement with the union, and the union does have a specific process when they have a request for information as it applies to union matters. So in that instances, when it applies to union matters, we actually follow the collective bargaining agreement process for the request for information. Any questions or comments on the history and background and need for these rules? So sorry. For some reason, I think the slides got tossed around here. So just as a reminder, in our group norms for the discussion today, we really want to bring an equity-driven perspective and approach, center children, families, and early learning professionals, and stay curious and welcome other points of view. We want to seek first to understand and then seek to be understood, staying present, be appropriate and respectful with your words, and being aware of the power and privilege within this group. And then us as state staff, we make a promise to you that we will start on time and we will stop on time, if not sooner. We know that you are all very busy in the various roles that you have within the early learning system and for the children and families you are with or work with or are parent and families of. So for the general framework for the rules, we have three different big parts of it, and I am just looking at the chat from Tiffany. This record request would be inclusive too if a parent wants to request records, correct? Yes. Any member of the public, this applies to. So if a parent said an email or they went to our website and filled out the public records request form for a particular piece of information, this is the process that we would follow. So the framework of our public records request rules are really split up into three major portions that we'll see as we review the rule language today. The first part is our definitions. This clarifies the definitions of what a public record is, who a requester is, and who would be within the realm of a requester, clarifies who the department is, as well as photocopying and writing. The rules also cover the fee structure for making public records available and how we determine those fees as a department when we get a request from a member of the public. And then the rule also goes over fee waivers and reductions and really gives an outline of the process for determining when a reduction or waiver of fees may be made and what factors the department uses in the application of a public interest test to determine whether a waiver of fees is appropriate. I'm going to stop sharing the PowerPoint and I'm going to share the actual rule language and we will walk through this together. So if at any time you have thoughts or questions, please feel free to come off mute as we work through the rule language itself.
Before you finish, do you think that I just want to know other people's experiences with requesting public comment. I mean, not public comment, sorry, public records or records, maybe what they've experienced if anybody has, because I know that I'm new to it. So as somebody that didn't know the first thing about the rights and the timeline and everything, I know that it was kind of daunting. So so that other people know that how we can make it maybe a little easier for people.
Yeah, of course. Does anyone on the call have experience actually requesting public records and would like to share their perspective?
This is Annalise. I request public records outside of the union process fairly frequently, more often through DHS than DELC or previously Early Learning Division, Department of Ed. But I have to say, Early Learning Division historically has made it easier than requesting the records from DHS. The requests are processed much more quickly. DELC tends to not charge for public records requests, or charges a lot less than DHS does. I can only compare, right? Although doing public records requests through the legislature are generally processed a little bit faster than either of the two agencies, and they're a little quicker, and they also don't tend to charge. So, and then I DCBS too a little bit with public records there, and that's the worst of all of the agencies, in my opinion, to request records from. So I think it's, I think the best part is when I think that the best thing we can do to assist other members of the public who don't routinely do those records requests is to have something available on a website, forward facing, publicly facing, easy to find, right? So that people don't have to dig for it. An online request form is always, I think, preferred in this day and age, but there should be a form that can be downloaded, that can be written out if that's what people prefer. I like the online delivery. I'm not a big fan of having to download the form myself and submit it to a email box or some sort of online upload. So I think that makes it more accessible if the form is completely online and can be used with any device. And then if it's online, completely online, then it's also translatable by using your web browser. So I think that makes it, I think that's an important consideration, is that it has to be available in multiple languages. The waiver process generally I find doesn't work. I've tried it a couple times and that doesn't seem to really be a thing that actually gets approved. So I don't know how valuable having a waiver is if it's, I think that that's the one thing that is the least transparent of the whole process, is how what are the actual determining factors, and that should be on the website and available forward facing so that people don't waste their time filling out a waiver. Right. I don't know if you have specific questions, I can always address those too, but.
You hit every single spot that I would have spoken on with my experience with Department of Human Services and doing that. And then having to think, oh my gosh, I'm low income. How am I going to afford it if I don't have the money to pay for the waiver? or if I don't have the money to pay for the records, and then what if I don't get the waiver? And I've, in my experience in the last few years, I've been, met a lot of contradictory information, a lot of discrepancies. Somebody says something but it's written here, but it's not that way. And so every point that you made was on point, having everything where it's easily be able to be found, and so I appreciate that. Thank you.
Yeah, thank you for elevating Annalise and Tiffany. Anyone else on the call that would like to share their experiences if they have any? Scott, I don't mean to put you on the spot, but can you share some big buckets of areas that we get a lot of public records requests in, or maybe just a high level overview of a typical request?
Absolutely, absolutely. So I do not have any experience in making my own requests, but I have had experience working with ODHS and DELC in producing records. For DELC, a large portion of public records are actually requested by the media. So agencies are interested in programs like Preschool Promise and funding like that. We also do get requests from parents who are interested about what's going on at their child's program. We also get requests from providers about different investigations and program licensing that has occurred at their facilities as well. And that's oftentimes also what the union works on as well. So those are kind of the general overall buckets. We don't typically get too many just general curiosity kind of records requests. It's much more tends to be a media documentation. Another big one. I'm mad myself free in this one because we have quite several requests right now. A lot of education requests come in from universities. So people that are looking for research on how to improve access to childcare. So we get a lot of information across the country, actually across the world, will ask us for records about accessibility to childcare. And so that's a much more general data-based records request. So it's not a specific program, but more in terms of how many facilities are in Oregon and what kind of openings they have. So those tend to be the general overall buckets that public records requests fall into.
Thanks, Scott.
Chris, can I say one more thing? I just thought of something. Something popped in my head with what Scott was saying. I don't think that it's worthy of an administrative rule, but my suggestion for any agency or any part of government, especially the executive branch, that's controlled by the executive branch. I think it would be very helpful based upon the help that I give and the technical assistance that I give to providers that are requesting their own record, whether it's through CBR, it's through licensing, it's through Otis, whatever, would be to have some sort of technical document available just as a policy that indicates how to fill the request form out. Because while it seems self-explanatory, it is not always intuitive, something that is really easily filled out, right? You'd be amazed at sometimes what people can read into that if they're not familiar with the public records process and some of the lingo and some of the processes, right? And what public records actually mean versus your own record and all of that. So one more piece.
Thanks, Annalise. And for folks who aren't as familiar with the various infrastructures of the state, I'm trying to put in the acronyms in the chat. So we've talked about ODHS, that's the Oregon Department of Human Services. DCBS is the Department of Consumer and Business Services. I put in the web address for where you can make public records requests for DELC, and I'll actually pull that up right now and walk through it so folks can see. And then Otis is the Office of Training, Investigations, and Safety overview. The one thing that I would also say is there are sometimes when we actually have to work cross-departmentally to fulfill a public records request, or we actually have to point someone to another agency. Sometimes when this would happen is for the administration of the employment-related daycare program. There are some functions of that program that still administratively sit within the Oregon Department of Human Services, or for prior years before the Department of Early Learning and Care was established, some of those records still sit and are the custodian. ODHS is the custodian of those records, so we actually would have to appoint a member of the public to make a public records request of the Department of Human Services. But there are some instances when we would work with that cross-agency. And I'm going to show the current website that we have before I go into the rule language, just because I think this has come up a little bit. You can see the public records request process on our Contact Us page. You'll have to scroll down a little bit because this gives general contact information on the top of the page, and then field offices information, and then media contact. And then down here, as you scroll, you can see records a request, making a request, what statutes govern making a public records request. We have a web form that you could submit the request in from, or you can do a public records request by mail. We also have an email address for questions, and then we go over the calculation of fees for certain documents and staff time, and what the fee waiver is. And if you click on the web form for this, this will bring, this should say Delk Public Records Request, but it will bring you to a Smartsheet form, and you can fill out your contact information here so that we can get back to you as an agency. And then here's the field for the information that you'd be requesting that you can give an explanation of. And you can also have this send yourself a copy of the responses so you can see what was sent to us as the agency, as well as you keep a copy for your records. So we are actually not changing our public records request process at all. We're just using these rules to codify what we're currently doing. So now I'm going to share the rule language. And there's only 2 rules that go over our public records request process. The first one is 414-002-0000, and this is the definitions rule. And it gives you definitions of how the terms will be used within the rule set here, how department, it refers to the Department of Early Learning and Care, and our subunits. So something that would be a subunit would be our Child Care Licensing Division, or CCLD. Another subunit would be our programs department, where we have Preschool Promise and Baby Promise. Defines who a person is that can make a request. Gives a definition of photocopying, what's considered a public record, a requester, and writing. Is there any feedback on the language used in the definitions section? And thank you, Tiffany. I see maybe adding rights, laws, and regulations with links to support and a feedback box. We will take those notes and see how we can change the website and the form to incorporate some of that feedback. Okay. And then the next rule The proposed rule is 414-002-001. This is fees for inspection for copies of public records and department publications and other services. Here you can see it says that the department may charge a reasonable fee for making records available, and what costs can include but aren't limited to. So the costs can include the services and supplies used in making the records available, time spent locating the requested records, reviewing the records, redacting, and or separating material exempt from disclosure. This is really important because of the sensitive nature of the records that we have within the Department of Early Learning and Care for families, for children, and providers. We do ensure that they're reviewed before we give this information out to ensure that we're redacting personal information and any information that's exempt from a public records request as a matter of privacy and protection for children, families, and providers. Because of that, we also could include supervising a person's supervising their inspection of the original documents, copying records, certifying those copies, summarizing, compiling, or organizing those. Sometimes we get pretty large public records requests, and it's really helpful to create a summary so that person and member of the public can actually navigate the information being given to them, and that we can organize it in a way that they had requested it to be submitted to them. Again, here's that nod to searching and reviewing records that might be exempt from disclosure. Some other costs more on the postal and freight charges and indirect charges. A quick note here that a fee will not be charged for the cost of time spent by an attorney in determining the application of the provisions of ORS 192.410 to 192.505, so of the public records request. This gives a little bit more information on how staff time costs are allocated. Cost for retrieving records from the state's mainframe computer system. No additional fees charged for providing records or documents in an alternative format when required to be in compliance with the American with Disabilities Act or ADA. And that we have to notify the requesters of the estimated fees for inspection or providing copies to the requester, and that will provide written notice of the estimated fees and will not act further to respond to the request until the requester notifies us, the department, in writing to proceed if they know the cost. And that we may require a portion or all of the fees before we start our work. A little bit more on how those estimated fees are construed. If we find out that there are more documents, and in order to be responsive to the requester's actual request, that we might actually have to pull more documents, we may have to update that fee and notify the requester and what the process is for that. I'm going to pause here because I can see that Tiffany is putting some things into the chat, and I just want to make sure we're elevating them. Tiffany, do you want to come off mute and say any of these things, or do you want me to read it from the chat?
You can read it from the chat if you'd like.
Tiffany Graven says, I know when I have had to request records, a concern I had was making sure I worded my request in a legal manner and how to state dates. This was a barrier as many are not educated on how to state the request so that nothing is left out. And possibly including, I think this is the timeline for when the agency has to be responsive to requests. Am I reading too much into this, Tiffany? Okay, yes. Okay, we will take that feedback. And then section 4 is how the department may reduce or waive fees when a determination is made and that the request is of public interest. So the important parts here is that making the records available primarily benefits the general public. And this really outlines the factors that we use as department staff in consultation with our Associate Attorney General in the Department of Justice to make a determination on this. So here are the factors. The first is the requester's identity. Second, the purpose for which the requester intends to use the information, whether the requested information is already in the public domain, the request is narrowly tailored to a matter of public interest. And what we mean, sorry, by something is already in the public domain is if you could Google it and actually find that information, or if you could look online and find the number of a department or like an address for a provider, some of that information is already technically in the public domain because it's publicly searchable information. Another factor is whether the requester can demonstrate the ability to disseminate the information to the public. This is really a factor used when we get media requests. The overall time needed and expense to be incurred by the department to fulfill the request. So as you can tell, if there's something that's going to take 5 minutes to pull in comparison to maybe 3 weeks across departments and across different teams, that could be a really big difference in the overall time needed and expense to fulfill that request. The volume of records requested is reasonable and not unduly burdensome to the process. The request requires the department to segregate exempt from non-exempt materials. And this just means that what would be added here is that this actually takes a lot of time for the department to review all of this to redact possibly sensitive information. So if there's a provider's information and the provider happened to have a report or complaint that involved child welfare and an Oregon Department of Human Services child welfare investigation, we would want to make sure that we are reviewing all of those materials and making sure that everything that is subject and exempted from that public records request is actually redacted. So it requires a little bit more time to review. Another is that the fees are otherwise avoidable, including the requester's ability to utilize the ordinary tools of discovery as part of pending administrative, judicial, or arbitration proceedings. We can also include, and the factor is the ability of the requesters to pay the fee. So if we know, if the requester themselves says that they absolutely cannot pay the fee, that is a consideration that we could have that is in the request. And that the last part of this is that in all requests for waiver or reduction fees need to be in writing to the department. And if a request is denied, what needs to happen and how the requester can petition the Attorney General for a review of the denial and where they can go to find the provisions about how they pursue that petition. Any questions or additional comment on this language or the factors to consider for reduction or waiver in fees?
Hey, Chris, can I just ask a quick question? Did you, or Delk, did you all publish this under the May or the June bulletin?
It's in May.
May, thank you.
Of course, Quentin. It was whether this rule language was published in the Secretary of State's May or June bulletin of proposed rules. And these proposed rules were in the May Secretary of State's bulletin. And we did include the notice of proposed rulemaking. And if for some reason you need that again, when I send the conclusion email from this rulemaking advisory committee out either this evening or tomorrow morning, I will include the notice of proposed rulemaking again, so you have the language.
I just had a request from my local to include what bulletin it was in, and I thought I would ask so I didn't have to go look.
Oh yeah, no worries.
To save myself some time. So yeah, I've got the language, yes, and I can include that, attach that for my folks.
Thanks, Annalise. I know that there are a lot of documents in the rulemaking process too, so I want to make this as easy as possible for folks to navigate. Okay, I know that this is a lot of information and it is technically a lot of legalese for what public records requests are and public records as they apply to the agency. But really want to thank you for making time for this rulemaking advisory committee and your comments on the process and making the process that we have on our webpage even more accessible as well. If you are thinking about the rules that we reviewed today and have additional feedback, there are times that you can submit additional feedback on the content of these rules or even of the process of making public records requests to the Department of Early Learning and Care. We have our public hearing, which is a hearing where we can't engage in a conversational back and forth like we did today, but we can actually receive verbal public comment on these public records rules on May 23rd from 5 to 6 p.m. And I'll also send that information out via email with the Zoom information. The public comment period will end on these rules on May 31st at 5 p.m. So you have until May 31st to submit any additional feedback on these rules. And then we are going to present these rules to the Early Learning Council for review in their first draft form on May 22nd. So that's tomorrow. And then the Early Learning Council will be voting on the public records rules at their June 26th meeting.
I have one last question, Chris. Do you have time for that? There's just one last thing that I just was thinking of. If a child care provider, family child care provider, this probably doesn't apply to licensed centers, certified centers, but if a licensed provider, especially a registered family or regulated subsidy provider, requests to have their address, their home address, not publicly facing, is that something that would be given out in a public records request? Is that something that we should put into rule? Or is it
No,
necessary?
it's actually in statute that if a childcare provider requests it not be publicly available, that it be exempt specifically for
Right.
the reason if there's stalking or domestic violence. So we would just need a provider to actually email us that they would not want this information to be available via a public records request, and then that information would be flagged so it isn't given out. For instances when there are public records requests made of a child care provider's information, requesters actually have to follow a very specific procedure to get that information, and they need to share information themselves. And that's all outlined in statute because those providers are smaller and maybe giving care to more vulnerable populations. So there's that added layer of protection, but there is that exemption in those instances for domestic violence and stalking to ensure that that information is never given out, even if that process is followed. And Scott, I don't know if you wanted to add anything there, because I know that you deal with this a lot more than I do.
No, absolutely. There is a form. I've been trying to find it, but I can't be able to find it. I'll try to forward it along to you at least later on. But there's a form that provider can fill out saying, please withhold my address.
Right. And you can do it when you can email your licensing specialist. You can, I mean, there's lots of ways to have it exempt. I just didn't know if it, because the rule, cites back to the law. I wasn't sure if having that actually stated in the rule would be helpful, because here's my thought. I don't know how many people actually, read these rules or are going to read these rules, but certainly these are a bit more accessible in terms of language and being able to find them and being able to access them than the law itself is. And the rules are more easily searchable than the law. And so I didn't know if there would be a value in just calling that out in the administrative rule or not. So.
Thanks.
you.
We
Yeah.
can
Thank you, Annalise, because I had similar questions, so thank you.
Yeah.
We can take that and ask the Department of Justice whether we should include it on the rules. Sometimes if it's very clearly stated out in statute, they don't want us to reiterate it in rule just in case if there's a conflict in the language, and they wouldn't want them to be in conflict with one another. So they would rather us just to refer to the statute. So we can get back and consult DOJ with that. And I saw that Tiffany put in the chat. So if it is exempt, then does that mean it is listed with advertising your daycare? So that means if something is an exempt and it is exempt and a provider asks us as a department not to share it, we will not share that information on any of our public facing websites or information, or if we get a private request for that information, we still will not share it as a matter of public records request because it is exempt. But if you as a provider choose to share that information in your advertising for your daycare center, you can still choose to do that. That's how you would like to share your information. This exemption really just applies to us and the information that we're sharing on providers and the partners within the early learning system that we contract with to do work on behalf of the department. So if someone calls 211 and asks for that information, like those types of things, or with a childcare resource and referral center, because they are working in concert with the agency, wouldn't be giving that information out publicly. Sorry, it's really overly complicated. Any other questions or things that folks would like to discuss? Well, if you have additional questions on the process or what records are subject to public records requests and have additional thoughts, please feel free to reach out to me via email, and we can set up an additional time to talk, or I can take written public comments. My email is crys.o'grady, OGRADY, @delc.oregon.gov. I will also send an email to our rulemaking advisory committee participants, so you'll have my contact information and just some reminders. And if you are eligible for reimbursement for attending today, we will have a staff member named Marissa that will be following up on reimbursement for you and your attendance here today. Thank you so much for sharing your expertise with us this evening. We really appreciate the time that you took to review the materials and to be in conversation, and we'll talk to you all soon.